Vice President J.D. Vance and his anti-fraud task force been all over the country recently, tackling $250 billion cumulative dollars in government fraud. But the work to root out the fraud in Minnesota is not done yet. Today, the National Fraud Enforcement Division at the DOJ announced charges against 15 more defendants involving 90 million taxpayer dollars stolen from you and I. And while the fraud is out in Minnesota is shocking and all that stuff, but it's almost like predictable at this point. The absolute lack of oversight from the previous administration. It's unbelievable. I'm looking at you, Timmy Waltz and Ilhan Omar. You claim to know everything about the Somali people. You're going to claim that you didn't know anything about, what, $9 billion of fraud that left that state to Mogadishu? White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, Stephen Miller. Sir, I mean, this is an incredible effort. I appreciate it. How much more is to come?
This is just the very, very beginning of all of government, across all agencies, top-down, vice presidential task force, presidentially directed and orchestrated effort to root out the systemic looting of the American taxpayer and the pillaging of the American treasury. Look, what is happening in Minnesota is one of the most egregious things that has taken place in the history of this country. The Democrat Party, Obama, Biden, really it goes back to the Clinton administration, began mass importing Somali refugees and dumping them into Minnesota, in Minneapolis. So they're not only there, also into Maine, also into Ohio, but the biggest community by far in the Twin Cities, forever transforming that community. And that same population of refugees, because they came from a part of the world that doesn't have or believe in the rule of law, that doesn't have or believe in the idea of following rules and abiding by regulations and systems of justice, came to Minneapolis and began the mass fleecing of the American taxpayer. And so what you're seeing here, case by case, revelation by revelation, is the discovery that the people we brought into our country are trying to rob us blind.
Correct. But the other thing is, you know, there's been a number of claims out there that most of the national debt, we're talking about $39 trillion, is cumulative in large part because of fraud. Is that true?
I think it's absolutely true. Let me make a couple statements. First statement, but for fraud, I believe that we would have a balanced budget in this country. In other words, if the only benefits that were issued were benefits to people who fully and facially met the criteria of those programs and abided by all of the rules that govern those programs, I believe we would have a balanced budget. In other words, if the only people who received food stamps were those who actually needed food assistance, the only people who received free health care were those who fully qualified for and needed free health care, then I believe that we would have a balanced budget. The second point about the national debt is it's not a coincidence that if you look at two line graphs in American history, which is the great opening of America's borders, which started in the 1970s, and then, of course, went exponential from there, and then the great acceleration of America's debt, these two things track together, which is, of course, why you see these lines go up a lot more in the 21st century when these trends really begin to accelerate in even greater measure. Because what we had as an immigration policy up until President Trump took office, and you've seen this sea change, but up until then, you had an immigration policy that brought people in who immediately became dependent on welfare, who immediately began drawing out of the system, not giving into the system. And so Americans go every day, they go to their jobs, they go to work, they kiss their kids goodbye, they go to an office somewhere, they go work at an auto mechanic shop, they go work at a construction site, they work hard, they sweat, they toil, they labor, and they see that there's millions of people, again, many of whom were brought into this country, flown in as refugees, came across the border, got green cards, whatever, who aren't working, are just collecting benefits. And obviously, that completely breaks down the social compact of the country.
Yeah, well, I mean, real quick, I got about 30 seconds left. Any of these programs where it's like, oh, this is only going to cost $2 million and it ends up costing $100 million, are those the initial targets?
Yeah, so obviously you've seen this explosive growth, for example, in the child care program. You've seen this unexplainable but-for-fraud growth in these autism programs, which have been particularly abused in Minnesota. So yes, that's an area where we're focusing. But housing, but the Vice President's task force looking at every single program. But let me just say this, a very important point. President Trump is doing what no leader in American history has done before. This fraud has been taking place for generations without punishment or prosecution. This fleecing, this looting, this pillaging has been taking place for generations without interruption. President Trump shut the border, he shut off these visa programs, he shut down the refugee programs, and then for the population that's here, he's going to pursue justice, and if you've committed a crime, you're going to jail, and if you're deportable, you're going to be deported. That has never happened before until now.
Yeah. It's weird. It's almost like you guys are the first one to abide by, I don't know, the law. Stephen Miller, pleasure, sir. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too.
He loves the Constitution. He fights for what's right. He hates the bad guys. He's a freedom warrior. He's your freedom warrior. Watch Carl Higbie every weekday on Newsmax.